I had the cake in one hand and the divorce papers in the other. He never even saw it coming. 25 years of marriage, 3 children we raised together, 1 house we built with our own hands from nothing. And on the one night I had convinced myself would be the best of my life, my husband Michael Whitman brought another woman into the middle of it. I stood there in a dress I had picked out 3 times before I got it right. In a backyard covered in string lights I had hung myself the week before, holding a knife meant for our anniversary cake. And I remember thinking, this is the moment I have been planning for, without even admitting it to myself. Nobody in that backyard knew what I was carrying inside my purse that night. Not my sister, not my closest friends, not even my own children, who had flown in from 3 different states just to watch their parents celebrate 25 years of what they believed was a real marriage. They saw candles and string lights and a table set for 40 people. What they did not see was the manila envelope tucked beneath my makeup bag, folded so many times the edges had gone soft, sitting there since early that morning, waiting for a moment I did not yet know I would choose. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I did not wake up that morning planning to end my marriage in front of our entire family. I woke up planning a party. I woke up thinking about seating charts and whether the caterer would arrive on time and whether Michael would remember to pick up his mother from the airport. I was, in every visible way, a woman preparing to celebrate. It was only later in the day, in a moment I still cannot fully explain, that everything I had quietly suspected for months arranged itself into a single, undeniable picture, and I made a decision that would change the rest of my life before the sun even went down. 25 years is a long time to build a life with someone. It is long enough to raise 3 children, bury 2 parents, survive job losses and health scares, and every ordinary disaster a marriage is supposed to weather. It is long enough to believe, the way I believed, that whatever cracks existed underneath the surface could still be repaired. If only I loved harder, if only I stayed patient, if only I looked the other way one more time. I had done all 3. I had done them for years. And still, on the night that was supposed to prove all of that sacrifice meant something, Michael stood at that party and introduced a woman to our guests, as though I would simply understand who she was without being told. I still remember her hand on his shoulder before I even knew her name. I remember the way certain guests smiled a little too carefully, the way my own sister would not quite meet my eyes, the way an entire room can somehow already know a truth that the person standing at the center of it has not yet been allowed to hear out loud. Everyone else had a 5-second head start on the worst night of my life, and I did not understand why until it was almost too late to do anything but stand there and watch it happen to me in real time, in front of everyone I loved most in the world. Before we go any further into what happened that night, and what I found out in the weeks after, that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, I want to pause for just a moment. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By the end of this story, you are going to understand exactly why I chose that night, of all nights, to finally act. You are going to understand who that woman really was, and how long she had already been a part of our lives before I ever learned her name. You are going to understand what I found hidden in the weeks that followed, the parts of my marriage I had never been allowed to see, and you are going to understand why, when Michael finally opened that envelope in front of everyone we knew, the silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard in 25 years of marriage. This is my story, and it starts on a night that was supposed to be about love and ended up being about the truth. Her name was Vanessa. I would not learn that until later in the evening, but I want you to hold on to it, because it matters more than you think right now. What I knew about her that first moment was almost nothing at all. A woman in her late 30s, dressed like she had been invited on purpose rather than brought along as an afterthought, standing close enough to my husband that I understood, somewhere underneath the part of my brain still trying to be a good hostess, that I was looking at something I was not supposed to see yet. 3 questions took root in me before I had even finished crossing the yard toward them. And those 3 questions are the ones that carried me through everything that followed. Who was Vanessa really? And how long had she actually been a part of our lives before that night? Why, of every possible evening in 25 years, did Michael choose our anniversary to finally stop hiding her? And what was it that I already knew, quietly, privately, in the weeks before that party, that made me carry a manila envelope into my own home the morning of our celebration, as if some part of me had already made peace with how the night was going to end? I did not have all the answers yet. I barely had the courage to keep smiling at our guests, but I had those 3 questions sitting in my chest like stones, and by the time the cake was cut, every one of them would be answered in a way I never could have prepared for. I met Michael Whitman when I was 23 years old, working the counter at a small bakery 2 blocks from the apartment I shared with 2 roommates in Columbus, Ohio. He came in every Tuesday morning for black coffee and a cinnamon roll, and it took him 4 months to ask for my number, which I later learned was less about nerves and more about the fact that he was saving up enough courage to ask me to dinner somewhere nicer than he thought he could afford. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. He was steady in a way that felt rare to me back then, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would, who remembered small details about my life that I had only mentioned once. I fell in love with him slowly, the way you fall in love with someone you plan on keeping. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony at my parents' church, followed by a reception in the same backyard where, 25 years later, I would eventually hand him an envelope instead of a slice of cake. That detail did not occur to me until much later, how the same patch of grass held both the beginning and the ending of everything. In those early years, we had nothing but each other and a stack of bills we could barely cover, and somehow that made us closer, not further apart. Michael worked construction jobs during the day and took night classes toward a business degree, and I baked wedding cakes on weekends to help cover rent, a small hobby that would eventually grow into the home bakery business I still run today. By the time we were 30, Michael had started his own property development company, small at first, just him and 2 crews renovating houses across the east side of the city. I watched him build something out of nothing, with the same steady determination that had made me fall for him in the first place, and I was proud, genuinely and deeply proud, to stand beside him while he did it. We had our first daughter, Emily, the same year the company signed its first major contract. 2 more children followed over the next 6 years, our son Ryan and our youngest daughter Grace, and our home filled up with the noise and chaos and love that I had always imagined a real family was supposed to sound like. For a long time, that is exactly what we were. I do not say this to convince you that everything was perfect, because no marriage that lasts 25 years is perfect. But I want you to understand that what we had was real before it became complicated. We took the kids camping every summer in the same overcrowded state park an hour outside the city. Michael coached Ryan's baseball team for 4 seasons, even though he had never played a day of baseball in his life. I built my little bakery business up from wedding cakes on weekends into a small storefront with my sister Diane as my part-time helper, and Michael was the first person to show up with flowers on opening day. We built a life out of small, ordinary devotion, the kind nobody makes documentaries about until it falls apart. The children grew, the company grew, and somewhere in the last several years, almost too gradually for me to notice at the time, Michael and I grew a little further apart than either of us ever said out loud. He started staying at the office later than he used to. Business trips that once happened twice a year started happening every other month. He bought a new wardrobe for himself that I privately thought looked a little young for a man his age, though I never said it, because what wife wants to accuse her husband of trying too hard to look attractive to somebody other than her? I noticed a new gym membership. I noticed his phone face down on the counter more often than it used to be. At the time, I called each of these things nothing. Looking back, I can point to 100 small moments that were never nothing at all. I want to be honest with you, because I think that is the only way this story is worth telling. There was a version of me, in those last 2 years before the anniversary party, who suspected something was wrong long before I had any proof. I did not want to know. I told myself that 25 years of history had earned us the benefit of the doubt, that a man who had built an entire life alongside me would not throw it away quietly, that whatever distance had grown between us was simply what happens to every long marriage eventually. I planned that anniversary party, in part, because some quiet, desperate corner of my heart believed that if I could just prove to both of us how much we had built together, it would remind him of everything he stood to lose. I spent 4 months planning that party. I had no idea I was also about to plan the end of my marriage. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up before the sun and started on the cake myself. A 3-tier vanilla and raspberry cake, the same flavor Michael had chosen for our wedding 25 years earlier. I remember standing in my kitchen at 5 in the morning, humming along to the radio, feeling something close to peace for the first time in months. It was only after the cake was finished and cooling on the counter that I walked into our bedroom closet to find something to wear, and reached instinctively for the folder I had hidden behind a row of winter sweaters 3 weeks earlier. I do not fully know, even now, why I decided to bring it with me that day. I told myself it was simply because I did not want to leave it in the house while 40 guests wandered through our home. I have since come to believe some part of me already knew I might need it before the night was over. Guests started arriving around 6 in the evening. My sister Diane came early to help set up, along with my daughters Emily and Grace, my son Ryan, and dozens of friends and family we had collected over 25 years of marriage. The backyard looked exactly the way I had imagined it for 4 months. String lights strung between the oak trees, round tables covered in white linen, a small dance floor Michael's crew had built out of leftover decking material from one of his job sites. I remember feeling, for the first hour of that party, genuinely happy. I remember laughing with old friends I had not seen in years. I remember thinking that whatever distance had grown between Michael and me over the past 2 years, we were still capable of building something worth celebrating. It was around 7:30 when Michael stepped away from a conversation with his business partner to greet someone arriving at the side gate, and I noticed her before I understood why I was noticing her at all. A woman in her late 30s, dressed carefully, moving through our backyard with a kind of familiarity that did not match a first-time guest. Michael's hand found the small of her back for half a second as he guided her toward the drink table, a gesture so brief that anyone not looking directly at it would have missed it entirely. I was looking directly at it, When he brought her over to introduce her to a small group of our friends a few minutes later, he said only one sentence. "This is Vanessa. Not a co-worker, not a friend of a friend, just a name, offered as though I was already supposed to understand exactly who she was and why she belonged at our anniversary party." I smiled, because that is what 25 years of marriage teaches a woman to do in public, and I excused myself to check on the caterers, and somewhere between the kitchen and the dessert table, I began quietly cataloguing every detail I had been trying not to notice for the better part of 2 years. The way certain friends greeted Vanessa with a familiarity that told me this was not her first time meeting them. The way my sister Diane would not meet my eyes when I asked, as casually as I could manage, how long she had known Michael's new business associate. The way my son Ryan's face changed, just slightly, when Vanessa laughed at something Michael said from across the yard. Piece by piece, over the course of about 40 minutes, I understood that I was very likely the only person at my own anniversary party who had not already met this woman before that night. I want to tell you something now that I did not tell anyone at that party, not even my sister. 3 weeks earlier, I had sat across from a divorce attorney named Richard Bennett in a small office downtown, not because I had proof of an affair, but because a mother's instinct is rarely wrong about the shape of a lie, even when she cannot yet see its face. I had gone quietly on a Tuesday afternoon while Michael believed I was at the bakery, and I had asked Richard to prepare paperwork I was not yet certain I would ever use. I told myself it was simply prudent, that any woman in my position would want to understand her options. I did not tell myself the truer thing, which was that some part of me had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the night that would give me the courage to act on it. By the time Michael stood at the head of the table around 9 that evening, tapping his glass with a fork to signal the start of his toast, I had made my choice. I remember the way the whole yard quieted down, the way our children gathered close, the way Vanessa stood near the edge of the crowd instead of at the center, where a stranger should have stood, close enough that I understood she believed she belonged there. Michael raised his glass and began to speak about 25 years, about partnership, about everything we had built. I stood up before he finished. I walked to my purse sitting on the gift table, and in front of 40 guests, in front of my children, in front of my sister, in front of the woman my husband had brought into our marriage, without ever asking my permission, I handed him a manila envelope instead of the cake knife everyone expected to see in my hand. He did not open it right away. He simply stood there, glass still raised halfway, staring down at the envelope as though he could not fully understand what it was, or why I was the one holding it. I remember the silence that followed, more clearly than almost anything else from that entire night. A silence so complete that I could hear the string lights humming faintly overhead. 25 years of marriage, and I finally understood that some things you do not find out. You confirm them, on your own terms, at a time of your own choosing. He had not even opened it yet, and that silence, stretching out across our backyard, in front of everyone we loved, was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my entire marriage. What happened in the 60 seconds after Michael finally opened that envelope is something I have had to piece back together from other people's memories, because in the moment, I remember very little beyond the sound of my own heartbeat. My daughter Grace told me later that Vanessa took a step backward toward the gate almost immediately, as though some instinct told her the safest place to be in that moment was gone entirely. My son Ryan told me that Michael's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the papers into the cake itself. My sister Diane, who I would later learn had suspected something for almost a year, and said nothing out of some misguided loyalty to keeping the peace. Simply put her arm around me and walked me into the house before I had to watch whatever Michael was going to say next. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life, not because of any single dramatic confrontation, but because of the slow, exhausting unraveling of 40 years of shared history into two separate lives. Michael moved out within a week, first into a hotel and then, I would later discover, into an apartment that Vanessa had apparently already been helping him look at for nearly 2 months before our anniversary party. Our children reacted in 3 very different ways. Emily, my oldest, was angry in a way I had never seen from her before, refusing to speak to her father for nearly a month. Ryan withdrew quietly, the way his father often did when something hurt him too much to discuss out loud. Grace, my youngest, cried on my kitchen floor for an hour, and then asked me the question I still think about most. She asked me how long I had known. In those first weeks, I let myself believe a version of the story that was easier to carry, that Vanessa was simply a moment of weakness, a midlife mistake Michael had made and would eventually regret, that whatever had happened between them was recent and reckless rather than deliberate and sustained. I wanted to believe that, because the alternative was almost too heavy to hold. My closest friend, Karen, who had spent 20 years working as a paralegal before retiring, sat with me one evening and gently suggested that if I truly wanted to understand what I was dealing with, I should stop guessing and start looking. Not out of vengeance, she told me, but because I deserved to know exactly what I was walking away from before I finalized anything with Richard Bennett's office. What Karen and I found over the following 3 weeks changed the entire shape of the story I thought I was living. Buried in old email archives Michael had never bothered to clear from our shared home computer, I found hotel confirmations stretching back nearly 2 years, long before Vanessa's name had ever crossed my mind as anything other than a business associate mentioned in passing. I found a second phone bill, hidden inside a folder labeled with the name of one of his construction suppliers, tied to a number I did not recognize. I found photographs, saved and then deleted, and then somehow recovered through an old cloud backup neither of us had thought to disable, dated back further than either of us had ever spoken the word affair out loud in our home. But the detail that changed everything, the one that turned this from a story about betrayal into something far more complicated, was the discovery that Vanessa was not simply a woman Michael had met at a conference or through mutual friends, the way I had assumed. Vanessa had been quietly brought on as a financial consultant for Michael's development company nearly 3 years earlier, recommended, of all people, by my own brother-in-law, who worked alongside Michael on several projects and had never once mentioned to me or to my sister that the woman helping manage Michael's company books was the same woman who would eventually stand in my backyard uninvited. She was not a stranger who had wandered into our lives by accident. She had been inside our lives, quietly, professionally, financially, for far longer than I had ever imagined possible. The community around us reacted the way small communities always do, with equal parts sympathy and gossip, friends quietly taking sides, acquaintances suddenly eager to share details they had apparently known for months and never once thought to mention to me. Michael, for his part, tried for a while to control the narrative among our mutual friends, describing what happened as a marriage that had simply run its course, rather than what my own investigation was beginning to reveal it actually was. I stopped caring, fairly quickly, about managing what other people believed. I had spent 25 years managing everyone else's comfort around the shape of my own marriage, I no longer had the energy or the interest in managing anyone's comfort but my own. I believed, by the end of those 3 weeks, that I finally understood the full shape of what had happened to me. I was wrong. What Karen and I uncovered next, buried in the financial records of Michael's company, was not simply proof of an affair. It was proof of something far larger, something that would not only end my marriage, but threaten to unravel everything Michael and I had spent 25 years building together. And it would force me to ask a question I never expected to be asking a divorce attorney. Not simply how do I leave this marriage, but how do I protect what is left of it before there is nothing left at all? Michael's development company, the one he had built from 2 renovation crews into a business worth several $1,000,000, had been quietly bleeding money for nearly 2 years, and I had never once seen a sign of it, because Vanessa, in her role managing the company's finances, had been the one keeping those numbers hidden from everyone, including, I would eventually learn, from Michael's own business partner. What Karen and I found, working alongside a forensic accountant, Richard Bennett, brought in once he understood the scale of what we were dealing with, was a pattern of transfers moving money out of the company and into accounts connected to Vanessa personally, dressed up as consulting fees and vendor payments that never quite matched any actual vendor. I sat in Richard Bennett's office the day the accountant laid it all out for us, and I remember feeling something shift inside me that was different from grief, different from anger, something closer to a strange, cold clarity. Michael had not simply been unfaithful to me. He had been, whether willingly or through sheer negligence, born of infatuation, allowing the company we had built our entire family's security around to be quietly hollowed out by the same woman he had brought to our anniversary party. When I finally confronted him with what we had found, sitting across from him in a mediation room neither of us wanted to be in, I watched a man I had known for 30 years look genuinely, completely blindsided for the first time since this entire story began. He told me he had suspected Vanessa was being sloppy with some of the numbers, but had never imagined, had refused to imagine, that a woman he believed loved him was capable of what the accountant's report described in exhausting, undeniable detail. I do not know, even now, how much of his shock was real, and how much was simply a man finally being forced to see clearly what he had spent 2 years choosing not to look at too closely. What I do know is that watching him absorb that betrayal, sitting across a conference table from the woman he had once stood beside our children for, was one of the strangest, most complicated moments of my entire life. I did not feel vindicated. I felt, more than anything, exhausted. That night, after the mediation session ended, and I drove home to the house we had built together, I finally allowed myself to fall apart in a way I had not let myself do since the night of the party. I sat on my kitchen floor, the same floor Grace had cried on weeks earlier, and I cried until I did not have anything left to cry with. I had spent weeks being strong in public, strong in front of my children, strong in front of Michael, strong in front of a room full of lawyers and accountants, laying out the financial ruin of my own marriage in spreadsheet form. That night, alone, I finally let myself grieve everything at once. Not just the marriage, but the 25 years of trust I had given to a man who had let a stranger walk into the center of our lives without ever once asking whether I would be safe there. It was somewhere in the weeks that followed, slowly and without any single dramatic turning point, that I stopped asking myself why this had happened to me and started asking myself, for what felt like the first time in decades, what I actually wanted my own life to look like going forward. I had spent 25 years building a business, a home, a family, almost entirely in service of a marriage that had, in the end, been quietly hollowed out from the inside without my knowledge. I realized, sitting in Richard Bennett's office, reviewing settlement terms designed to protect what remained of the company and my own financial future, that I was no longer simply the woman whose husband had betrayed her. I was becoming someone else entirely, someone I had not had the space to become in a very long time. Michael thought, I believe, that the party was the end of the story, the dramatic climax of a marriage falling apart in front of an audience. It was not the end. It was only the end of the marriage itself. What came next? The slow legal unraveling of a business built on a foundation neither of us had realized was already cracked. The discovery of exactly how long Vanessa had been embedded in our lives, and the strange, unexpected reckoning that followed for everyone involved. That was the part none of us saw coming, and it is the part of this story that changed all of our lives more permanently than a single evening in a backyard ever could. Vanessa disappeared from Michael's life almost as quickly as she had appeared in mine. Once the extent of the financial misconduct became public within their small professional circle, and once it became clear that Michael intended to cooperate fully with the accountant's findings rather than protect her, she left the state entirely within a matter of months, leaving Michael to face what remained of both his marriage and his company almost completely alone. I will admit there is a part of me that once imagined some sense of satisfaction in watching that happen. What I actually felt, when I heard the news secondhand through a mutual friend, was closer to a quiet, sad recognition that nobody in this story had walked away with what they thought they wanted. Michael kept the company, though it took nearly 2 years and a significant settlement to me and our children to stabilize it. He lives alone now, in a smaller house across town, and our relationship today exists mostly through our children, polite and distant in the way that 25 years of shared history sometimes settles into once the anger has finally burned itself out. I do not know if he is happy. I have, somewhat to my own surprise, stopped needing to know the answer to that question. As for me, I want to tell you what happened to my life, because I think it is the part of this story that matters most. The settlement allowed me to finally expand the small home bakery I had run for over 2 decades into a proper storefront downtown, something I had quietly wanted for years and had always set aside in favor of Michael's business, our children's needs, everyone's life but my own. My daughters and son, once the initial anger softened into something more complicated and more forgiving, became closer to me than they had ever been. Spending holidays at my new home, instead of splitting their time the way children of divorce so often have to. I built, out of the wreckage of that one terrible night, a life that finally, fully belonged to me. People ask me sometimes, when they learn this story, whether I regret what I did that night, whether I regret ruining the party in front of everyone we loved. I tell them the same thing every time. I did not ruin anything. I simply stopped pretending that something was not already ruined, and I chose, for the first time in 25 years of marriage, to let the truth exist in the open, instead of quietly protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own. If you had been sitting at that table with me, watching the man you had spent half your life with introduce another woman, as though you were the one who did not belong there, I wonder whether you would have seen it coming the way I eventually did, or whether, like me, you would have looked away for years before you finally let yourself see the whole picture clearly. I have told you this story because I know, without any doubt, that I am not the only woman this has ever happened to. If any part of what I shared today felt familiar to you, I want you to know you are not alone in it, and I would genuinely love to hear your story in the comments below. Tell me, have you ever had a moment in your own life where you finally stopped pretending, where you chose to let the truth exist out loud instead of protecting everyone else's comfort? I read every single comment, and I promise you, your story matters just as much as mine does. If this story affected you the way I hope it did, wait until you hear what happened when I finally learned the whole truth about why Vanessa really wanted to be at that party in the first place, a detail I have not shared with anyone until now. If you are new here, this is where I share the real stories people so rarely say out loud, the ones about the quiet, complicated truths hiding underneath ordinary lives that look perfect from the outside. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, and I will see you very soon.